Buenas tardes, everyone. Welcome to Immediate Immersion Live. I'm so glad to have you guys here today. And today we're going to be talking about assessments and all about summative assessments. Next week we'll reserve the time for formative assessments and informal assessments that we do in our class as well. So welcome with us today. My name is Scott, and you're watching Immediate Immersion Live, where we are all about comprehension-based instruction in the modern language classroom. And we'll be right back after this short intro. And welcome back, everybody. So glad to see you guys here today. I'm glad you guys show up every week. So today we're going to talk about summative assessments. I know this is always a hot topic. Everybody thinks it's a lot more complicated than it is. So we're going to talk about it, kind of demystify it a little bit today. And a couple of things I want to talk about before we get into actual assessments is, what is an assessment really? And people have different views about what they are, but a lot of people put too much into what an assessment is supposed to be and do. An assessment is not meant to make kids feel good or feel bad, either one. It is not meant really for even giving a grade. True assessments is a form of feedback. So you know, and the student knows, and the parents know where the student is when it compared to the standard at that moment in time. Are they meeting the standard? Are they exceeding the standard? Are they close but still a little bit short? Are they far from the standard? Or do they just not show any evidence of learning? So we should not be using assessments for motivation. We should not be using assessments for ranking students or comparing students with each other. Assessments are just feedback. Feedback to the students so they know where they stand within the standard. Feedback to us teachers so that we know where our students stand, because that tells us what to do next. If everybody did well on the assessment, and when I mean everybody who tried to do the assessment, and our goal is about 80% at that proficiency level, and proficiency usually means a B or 80%. So if 80% of my students who are trying, I don't include the kids who just don't try, don't put any effort in whatsoever, but 80% of the kids who try, if they pass it with a proficient score or better, then I know my job was done and we can move on. If not, my job is not done and we need to work on whatever it is. We also have to think about that we don't blame the students for not doing well. Them not doing well on the assessment is always our fault as a teacher for those kids who try. Again, for the kids not trying, we're not talking about those kids. We're talking about kids who are trying but may not make the goal. We either taught something too fast, we didn't teach it thoroughly enough, we wrote a bad assessment, or we expected too much on the assessment. And so when we analyze our data, which is important, we need to figure out where we went wrong, if we went wrong. If the assessment was good, we got 80% or more of our kids getting proficient or better, then we're good. You might want to look at individual questions to see if like a lot of kids got a particular question wrong and try to figure out why that might be. Is it a lack of vocabulary? Was it a tricky question? Was the wording off? Was it a bad question? Was it an error in the key? All of those types of things you want to look at. But otherwise, if 80% did well, then you're good and you can move on to the next lesson. Now, if 80% didn't do well, then we know we have to reteach. But we need to now analyze the data even further to see who do we need to reteach. Is it just a handful of kids? Is it a small group of kids? Or is it the majority of our kids? So you'll figure out how to handle what is coming next based off that data. If it's a handful of kids, you might set up something before, after school, or during lunch to work with those kids on that particular thing. If it's a small group, then you might work with that group during class while you're having other kids work on something else. And if it's the majority of the class, then you're just going to teach it whole class again, but in a different way. Just repeating the same instruction. Obviously, that didn't work the first time, so you need to do it a little bit different. It may be that you just went through the material too fast. In that case, you can go back to the beginning, do some more stories, do some more readings, but go slower pace. Other times, they just didn't get it the way you taught it the first time, so you need to look back and think, is there another way that you can tackle this? So if you did a story asking story with a following text, then maybe work in maybe a movie talk or a picture talk. Or do a collaborative write and discuss of a story instead of an oral story, so they can see it as it unfolds. Find different ways to attack it and maybe do some review activities. Look at review games that you can do with it, or review activities. Lots of times, especially for stories and texts, I will just Google review reading activities. Doesn't even have to be set up for teaching in a language. It could be an English thing, and I can find a way to adapt it to what I want to do. I get a lot of ideas from that. Also, go back and search for elementary reading and story comprehension activities or games or reviews, because really, because we're at such a low level of language, we're kind of like teaching elementary. Even though our kids aren't elementary age, most of us, the subject matter is very elementary. So a lot of those activities might help. So just come at it at a different attack angle to be able to help those kids, and then reassess. Whenever you reassess, you cannot use the same assessment because it's invalid data. They could have remembered some of the answers from the first time they took that assessment, or other kids could have talked about that assessment, which helped them get through it. So you need to create a whole different assessment that assesses the same thing, just in a different way. So that's my my introduction, my preface into assessment. Let's talk about the actual assessments now, because a lot of people ask me and struggle with, how do you assess students? I'm not going to go into everything in bit by bit detail, just because we just don't have the time for that today. But if you register for our Webversity Pro class, which contains over 30 lessons at mm.us/webversity, and live Q&As monthly from September through May, we go into complete detail in assessment. And even in one of our live sessions, we take your student samples of writing and student samples of speaking, and we assess them together as a group so that we can what's called calibrate the rubric, see where we are, see how we assess, see what our kids are able to do. So we go into complete detail of the assessment piece, not only the grade book and rubrics, but creating and then evaluating the assessments as well. So if that's something you're interested in, you can go to mm.us/webversity and you can register for that. So let's start with listening and reading assessments. Now, sorry, I'm really thirsty today. For listening and reading assessments, they're the same thing. It's just one is oral and one is textual. That's the only difference. So if you make one type of assessment for listening, you can make the same type of assessment for reading. So we're going to tackle them together as one. So generally, for listening or reading, students will either read or hear a prompt in the target language and then answer a question in their common language, which for most of us is English. And I know flags are going up right away. Why are we using English? We're using English for two main reasons. One is our kids aren't fluent. And we assess wholly in the target language once our kids are fluent, that we don't have to worry about them understanding the language that's being used. I know AP and IB tests teach 100% assess 100% in the target language, but I don't think that's going to give them the most accurate of readings for what they're looking for. So that's one. Another, especially in reading, they can look at the question, pick out keywords, and go back and find those keywords in the text and guess the answers. We don't want that either. We want to really know what they understood from the prompt, whether it be an oral prompt or a textual prompt. The second main reason is for my teacher, I need it for my teaching, for my teacher brain. I need to know not only did the student get the question right or wrong, but I also need to know why. Which means I need to reduce variables. I need to reduce it to one variable. Although I'm deathly allergic to math, one thing I do know is you cannot solve an equation with two variables. You need to get it down to one variable. So that's what we're doing here. If our assessment is in the prompt is in the target language and the questions are in the target language, then I have two variables for the possibility of why the student got it wrong. Or I have three. The first is they didn't understand the prompt. The second is they didn't understand the question, but they understood the prompt. And the third is they didn't understand the prompt or the question. So if they get that question wrong on the test, I have no idea why. Was it the prompt? Was it the question? Or was it both? But if the questions are in the common language, the language the students already understand, unless it was just a bad question or weirdly written, if they got it wrong because they didn't understand the prompt, not the question. So now I know that was where the problem was, and then I can work to fix it. I can work to help the kids understand that prompt. But again, I lose that ability if the questions are in the target language. Do kids need to be able to answer questions in the target language? Absolutely. But on a test is not the time. During class, during our stories, during our movie talks, during our readings, during our picture talks, I am asking tons and tons and tons of questions in the target language. So my kids are hearing the target language and answering appropriately every day, all day long. But on a test where I need to know and I need to get data to figure out, did my kids understand this prompt or not? I need my questions in English. So here are a few different types of assessments that I would give for listening and reading. And you can vary it up just to change things up, or some of them are more suited towards lower levels. So the first is a lower level activity where we're focusing on the sentence and not on paragraphs or stories. So for level 1, some of the first assessments I will give will be the prompt will be right before the question. It might be 2 or 3 sentences about something, and the kids really only have to listen for one or read for one keyword to be able to answer the question. So for example, and what I'm going to tell you would be in the target language. There is a boy named Michael. Michael plays basketball for the school. His favorite sport is basketball. And the question I would ask, which would be now in English, is, what sport did Michael play? Now I'm exposing my students to multiple sentences, not large paragraphs and not a full story, but they only really need to understand the key words that to answer the question. So that's really good for the lower level. You can also do that with a picture, especially if your kids are pre-literate. Excuse me. You could put a series of pictures that represent different activities. So let's say you're asking questions about different activities. You're asking questions about who listens to music, who plays an instrument, who likes to read, who watches TV, who plays video games, who plays baseball, who plays basketball, who plays hockey, etc. So my answer choices would be images of things that represent. So someone listening to music, someone playing an instrument, someone playing video games, so that they can match the question with the picture. And again, this can be oral or it can be textual. As my kids progress in the language, I'm now moving into short paragraphs and possibly even a whole story. And again, that will be in the target language, and then there will be questions in English about that. The difference here is it's not prompt, question, prompt, question, prompt, question, prompt, question. It is prompt, questions. So I usually let them listen to the prompts twice. I tell them, they don't always follow it, to listen both times carefully, picturing what goes on in their brain, or to read it at least twice before answering the questions. And then they'll answer the questions based on that. Now, writing these questions is very difficult. And why do I say that? I say that because we want to make sure that the questions can't be answered by guessing alone. So if I'm asking like colors of things, if I'm asking what color is the bear in the story, the answer can't be white, brown, or black, because those are common answers for a bear's color, and they could just guess to get it right. Or what color are grapes in the story? They can't be red, purple, or green because those are typical colors of grapes. So you have to make sure that kids can't answer the questions based on prior knowledge and guessing, which makes it hard. So sometimes I will run my quiz, just the questions, by another teacher who doesn't teach language, and ask them to answer the questions without the prompt at all, and see if they guess the answers, if they're too easy, they're too logical. We also don't want to have all of the questions concrete questions. What do I mean by concrete questions? That kids can find the answers in the text or in the prompt somewhere. Those are lower level questions. They're usually who, what, where, when, how, and why. And I want to kind of stretch that. So if I'm giving a 10-question quiz, 70%, so 7 of those questions will be answers that kids can find in the prompt. There's a definite answer. They can find it in the prompt. It'll be there. But 3 of the questions, which will be sprinkled through the 10 questions, they won't just all be in the beginning or all in the middle or all at the end, will be inference type questions. These are questions that you can't find the exact answer in the text, but if you look at the text as a whole or the prompt as a whole, then you can figure out what the answer is. Here's my prime example I always use. And this isn't just a problem in the target language, whatever language you're teaching. Kids also have this problem in English. So we want to teach these inference skills. So here's my example. If I write a story, whether they read it or they hear it, about this kid named Michael, and Michael plays basketball on Mondays, football on Tuesdays, soccer on Wednesdays, bowls on Thursdays, plays hockey on Fridays, on Saturdays he does baseball, and on Sundays he swims. So the concrete questions are, what sports does he play? Does he play basketball? What day does he play? Those are the concrete questions. But my inference question is Michael an athlete? Now, nowhere in the text or in the prompt does it say Michael is an athlete. So the kids need to understand the text as a whole and make a logical guess, an inference based on that. And here the answer would be yes. Why not? I mean, he's doing all these sports. He's obviously an athlete. And kids have problems with this type of question, both in English and in the target language. Now, they can't see this type of question for the very first time on an assessment. You will need to do these types of questions in your classroom with stories you do in class and with readings you do in class. So kids have some practice with this. And you may have to talk them through it. Because usually when I start these, I'll ask kids, how many think that Michael is an athlete? And how many don't? And you'll get various hands up. And then I'll say to the kids who don't think he's an athlete, why don't you think he's an athlete? And they're going to say, because it didn't say anywhere in the text. And then I'm going to ask the kids who did think he's an athlete and ask, why do you think he's an athlete? They're going to give me all kinds of answers, but mostly the answer is he plays all these sports. He must be an athlete. So then I show the kids how you can make these deductions, these inferences from all the evidence. And so I want 3 of those questions in there. The difference for me with answering the questions is if they can only answer the concrete questions, the highest grade they can get is a proficient or a B. They need to be able to also answer the inference questions to be able to get up to the A, or the mastery or exceed standards, whatever you call it at your school. So those are my main. Oh, for another one. So we've got prompt with pictures, so that the answers are pictures they select. Prompt with questions, and they answer those. We also have another one, prompt with drawing. That's another one you can do. This works really well if you're doing some kind of targeted vocabulary or working off a vocabulary list. For example, colors or body parts. One of the ones I do in level 1 is a coloring of a monster. So they have to not only know the body parts, but the colors. And so I'll either give them text that they'll read, or I will tell them what to do orally. If it's a reading one, I tell them to read all of the prompts first, because some prompts may give information. Some later prompts will give more detailed information off the earlier prompts. If I'm doing it orally, that's not possible. So I got to make sure I'm giving them everything in the right, proper order so that they go, oh, he told me to do this, but I need to modify it slightly because I did it this way and it needed to be that way. We don't want that to happen. So instructions will be something like, okay, my instructions for the whole class, everybody's drawing a monster. You have your 8 Crayola crayons in front of you. You need to draw the body parts, how they're described in the story, and you need to draw the right color. So I'll start with saying something like, the monster has 3 heads. And they'll start with their pencil because I haven't told any color yet. Then I could say, each head has only 1 eye. So now they're drawing 1 eye in each of the heads. The first head is orange. Now they have their color. The second head is green. And the third head is purple. All of the eyes are blue. Only the left face has a nose. And only the right face has a mouth. The mouth is big with lots of teeth. On the left head, he has a small ear. On the right head, he has a big ear, and there are no other ears. The monster has 1 purple body. The left arm is big. The right arm is small. Both arms are black. There are 3 fingers on the left arm and 5 fingers on the right arm. The monster has an orange tail. So you can see where I'm going with this. So you give them the instructions. They are coloring and they are drawing as you tell them. You already have your monster pre-drawn. That's what you're talking about. You're describing it. They just can't see it. and then you can evaluate it by comparing their picture with your picture. Obviously, not everything is going to be exact, but you're looking for sizes that are agreeing with you, colors that are agreeing with you, left versus right that are agreeing with you, those types of things, and the number of things that agree. So they can't have 4 heads, or only 1 head, or 2 heads. That shows they didn't understand. So those are my types of listening and reading assessments. And again, you can mix and match them. You can use them how you want. You could scaffold them, start with the pictures and maybe the drawings before you get to the actual questions. If there are any questions about listening or reading assessments, go ahead and drop them in the chat, and I'll be sure to answer them for you. And while you're doing that, let's go ahead and move on to our writing assessments. Now, there's lots of different things you can do for writing, but I'm going to tell you my absolute, positively, most favorite, which are quick writes. My students don't like doing quick writes, but I get the most valuable feedback from quick writes. Because they don't have time to edit, because these are timed writings, what the students get right on the paper, the structures and the vocabulary that they use correctly, that has been acquired and is now stuck in their brain. And that which they get wrong, the vocabulary they don't know, the structures that they don't use or use incorrectly, those are things that we still need to provide more comprehensible input to get them to be able to do those things. And because there's no time to edit, it's a real pretty picture. I can see it right away, clear as day. I can see how well my student matches the rubric, how well they match the standards very easily. The other type of writing is your edited writing. This is usually seen on final exams, or if you give your kids an essay assignment, essay in quotes assignment, they have time to edit this. And I find this type of writing problematic. It's really good for the kids' native language, like English, an English class, because they're not working on fluency. The assumption is the kids are already fluent in the language, and now what they're trying to do is beautify, to perfect their language, to make it as good as possible. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about getting words on the page in the best way possible. I'm not worried about them writing an 8th grade level essay or a 9th or 10th or 11th or 12th. They're not there yet. What they do write, I want to be as accurate as possible, but I'm not working on making their writing beautiful and polished using high-level vocabulary. I'm really working about getting them a fluent type of language on the paper. So when they have time to edit, it robs me of my job. I can't help them because there's a couple of things. Kids can erase so cleanly that you didn't even know a mistake was made. So right there, that robs me of an educational opportunity. I don't know that the student even made a mistake to be able to address it. When kids make mistakes, I make notes saying, okay, we need to work on this, we need to work on this, we need to work on this, we need to work on this. But when they cleanly edit to the point where I don't even know they made a mistake, I lose that opportunity. But obviously, because they made a mistake, they need some more practice or some more input with that. The other issue is Let's say I did notice they made a mistake. Was it a careless mistake that they caught right away? Or was it a mistake that they read through their paper 5, 6, 7 times before they realized it was a mistake? As a teacher, I would handle both of those types of mistakes differently. Angelica, I just saw your question. I apologize. Could you give me context what you mean for upper levels so I can answer that? I'm not sure if it's Angelica or Angelica. If you give me more context, I'll be happy to answer your questions. So, I don't want to be robbed of that, because if it's a careless mistake, I don't really need to put in much more time on it, just every once in a while. But if it's one that took them a long time to figure out, then we obviously need to spend a lot of time with that. But I don't know that, because I saw that they fixed something, but I don't know how long it took them to notice it was a problem. Now, with the types of essays you can have them write, for quick writes, they don't really have time to plot, think, and organize. So I don't do anything really complex in a quick write. But I'm an IB school, and some of our summative tasks are writing tasks, and they may have to write a simple persuasive essay or a simple narrative. Any of those. Okay, Angelica, I'll get you in just one second. So you can help them write this essay by giving a simple formula and working paragraph at a time. So let's say if we're doing one of the ones we do in our Spanish 3 classes is we ask them to write a persuasive essay on whether they think the Tomatina, which is a food throwing festival in Spain, is a waste of food. So they have to choose a stance for or against. We read an article, plus we go through a PowerPoint about the holiday and the celebration. So they have those two sources, and we start writing it. So I use the same framework that our English teachers use, so I'm not teaching them something completely different. But we simplify it because they're writing this in 7th and 8th grade, and they can't do that at that level. We're writing at a kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade level. So I show them the pattern and how we do it. The key words, how do we say, I believe that. Write our thesis sentence, and they write the first paragraph. They work on that paragraph for a day. And then we go to the next paragraph where they cite one piece of their first point and one piece of evidence that goes with it. Then they work on that one. And then we'll do the third paragraph where it's their point number 2 and then the evidence that goes with that. And then we'll do point number 3 and the evidence that goes with that. And then we'll work on writing a conclusion. One of the things in the English rubric is transition words. So I'll teach them those transition words so they know how to put those in Spanish as well. So that's how those types of writing assessments that I do. So they will either be edited ones where they have time to edit, and then we work on different types: the narrative, the expository, and then the persuasive. Quick writes are my go-to, though. I get most information from my quick writes. Now let me go back to Angelica's question. Should they also be answering in English, for example, for readings or listenings in upper levels? Absolutely yes. They're not fluent yet. The only time we should be assessing 100% in the target language is if they're fluent. The only reason for giving an assessment is to give feedback and to help you, and part of that feedback is to help you know what to do next. If you're still teaching them and you can't answer why they got the question wrong, because it could be the prompt, the question, or both, then you don't know how to fix it. You don't know what to do next. As I said, I know the AP and the IB tests do it that way, but they're also not trying to give feedback to students so that they can instruct them further on. It's an end goal for them. It's done. For me, I want to make sure that my kids understand. Now, it is important, and you're welcome, Angelica. It is important that kids be able to understand and answer the questions in the target language. But a test is not the place to do it. It's too high stakes for them. Their grade is based off of it, and your next step as a teacher is based off of it. So it's high stakes for both of us. In class, where it's low stakes, they're not getting a grade for it, and I can give instant feedback, I can ask the questions in the target language. So I do. All of my questions during class are in the target language. But I get instant feedback. If they don't answer, if nobody answers, I have crickets, I have to stop. And then I'll ask them right away in English, what was my question? I'm asking that to find out, is the question the problem or was it the prompt? If they can tell me what the question was in English, but can't answer it because they're all in crickets and not giving me any answers, then I know they did not understand the prompt. And I will go back and I'll reword the prompt, the story that we were reading, or I'll rephrase the reading that we were doing. But if they can't tell me, or they're making mistakes on what the question means, I know that's the problem. So then I'll rephrase the question and then they'll be able to answer it. But I get instant feedback that way, so I know how to proceed. On a test, no instant feedback. I don't know how to proceed. And if I ask the kid, why did you get this wrong? 9 times out of 10, they can't tell you. So that's why. And Angelica says, thank you, my department doesn't understand that. Yes, it's really, really important. And a lot of departments do it with the target language questions, especially in the upper levels. But again, you're trying to do too much with an assessment. And in order for an assessment to be effective, we need to know what we as teachers can do to fix the problem. And if there's too many variables, there are 3 variables in a prompt in the target language and questions in the target language. And you can't solve it. It is impossible to solve a 3 or even a 2 variable equation. You can only solve a 1 variable. So I have got to get the other 2 variables out. The other 2 variables are, they didn't understand the question is variable number 1. And the second one to get out is they didn't understand the prompt or the question. But if all they have to understand is the prompt, they don't have to worry about understanding the question. I have taken away 2 of the variables. So the only reason why the kid would get the question wrong is because they didn't understand the prompt. Unless it was just a bad question altogether. And that's why you come together as a team and you talk about them and you analyze. Did everybody get that same question wrong? Then I'd be looking at what was the reason. Is it a bad question? Is it badly worded? Is it asking something they have no clue about? That type of thing. But that's not usually the problem. The problem usually is that they get it wrong. It's they didn't understand the prompt. So thank you for asking that question, Angelica. Our next one, if you have any questions about writing, please go ahead and put those in. Is speaking. So speaking are the hardest ones. I grade the easiest. I give them the benefit of the doubt when it comes to speaking. They're only getting at most an average of an hour of comprehensible input a school day. And that's being extremely optimistic. That means they're there every single day. There are no disruptions. There are no absences. There are no, I'm falling asleep or dazing out for a few minutes. There are no fire drills. There are no assemblies, nothing. So they need tons of input to be able to speak. So we're expecting them to speak poorly to get a good grade because it's one of the hardest things. So I do have my rubrics. My rubrics are dictated by IB. We have to use the IB rubrics. But what do I have my kids do? There are 3 basic types of assessments that I have my kids do. The first is conversational. The second is presentational, groups. And then either conversational or presentational, individual. So for my conversations, we have a conversation day every week. This year it's on Wednesdays. I don't really like it on Wednesdays, but that's where it is because that's our short day. It's our PLC day. So our kids get out an hour and a half early so that we can meet in our PLCs and work with data and other things. That used to be, up until this year, was on Mondays. And doing conversations was a perfect segue into the week. It eased them in, and it's great to do on a short day. So I had to move it to Wednesday. Not happy about where it is there, but it works best within the schedule that way for me. So if you can do it on Mondays, do them on Mondays. The problem is our days are so short on Wednesdays. There's not really much else I can get done on a short day. It's a perfect amount of time for conversations. Excuse me. So I tell my students on day 1 of school that any conversation that they have with me is potentially graded. So we have conversation day every week. I call kids at random. I ask them a question, sometimes follow-up questions, and then I rate their answers, and I keep track of them. We usually use name cards. I have name cards, and so on the back, I'll just put a quick grade on the back. Just quick. And after about 3 or 4 of these over the course of the grading period, I will average these together and give them a interpersonal speaking grade. That's one way that I do that. If they're having a bad day and it's not typical, then I'm not going to put a grade on the back of that one. And I don't have to grade every single one of them. And the things I'm looking for are, did they understand my question? Did they answer my question? And then did they do something to continue the conversation? So for example, if I ask like a level 1, what's your name? And then they answer me, Susie, and stop right there, they understood, they answered, but they didn't do anything to continue the conversation. So they could go, and you? And then that would boost up their grade because now they're throwing it back so it becomes a conversation and not an interview or an interrogation. So that's for my interpersonal conversation grade. For my presentational grade, the next one I use small groups. So I will have kids form small groups, usually 4 to 5 kids. They will then take a piece of paper and draw a picture with a frame for every student in their group. So it's a 4 group. If it's a 4-person group, there are 4 frames to the story. If it is a 5-person group, there are 5 frames to the story, kind of like a comic strip. I don't care who draws the story. Each kid could draw their own picture, or one kid could draw all the pictures. It doesn't matter to me. But they can't have any words, text, symbols, digits, numbers, anything of that sort on it. Because I don't want them to read. I don't even let them put their name on the paper. I don't want them to have anything to read. The pictures are only there to give them an idea of what to say, kind of like their notes. And I don't want them writing notes because they're just going to read them. So we use the picture. This is a la the old AP test from many, many years ago. And I really like this. And the autonomy goes into the students, the agency, I should rather say, because they draw what they're comfortable with. Then I call the kids up at random, and each kid then tells their 1 frame of the story. And then I grade them off of a rubric. And while I'm thinking about it, let me type it here into the chat. I have a free set of rubrics that you can get at mm.us/rubrics. And it has my conversational, my writing, and my speaking rubrics there. They're the ones I used to use before we went fully IB and had to use the IB rubrics. Now, we used to at my school, I teach middle school, so we don't have final exam time like you do at the high school level. We used to set time for that once a trimester. We're on trimesters, but we don't do it anymore. But when we did, then I would have individual speaking time. So I would alternate every trimester as to whether it was a conversation that we were having one-on-one or if they were describing a picture. So if it was a conversation, then I would have a deck of cards of possible topics. The kids would shuffle the deck and then pull up, and that's the conversation we would have. So they wouldn't have any time to prepare for it. It's just stuff that we've done throughout the year. So it wouldn't be a complete surprise. For the picture, again, I'm doing it like the old AP exam. I would have what I call double-decker baseball. So I would have 2 chairs at the front of my room, and I would have a copy of the picture at each chair, plus the copy of the picture at my desk. So let's say let's say we're doing level 1 and I wanted them to speak to me for 30 seconds. So I would call the first student up. They would go to my first chair. I'd start my timer for 30 seconds. They would look at the picture trying to figure out what they're going to say. Then, when the timer goes off, I call my second student. The first student moves to the second chair. The second student goes in the first chair. And again, the pictures are on both chairs. They're the same picture. So now the student has a second chance to look. So basically, they get to look for twice as long as they talk. So if they're talking for 30 seconds, they look for a minute, 30 seconds in each of my on-deck chairs. And if they are talking for a minute, then they have a minute in each of the on-deck chairs because they're looking for 2. When the next 30 seconds is up, the kid then moves up to my desk where there's a chair and the same pictures there. I call up another student and everybody rotates up 1. And then I start listening to them tell me the story. So that works really, really well. So those are the 3 types of speaking that I do. Sometimes I will do a video one too. So this will be an individual one. And then I will give them some kind of a prompt, maybe a picture or some other kind of prompt. And in the corners of the room, they're going to do a recording of what they're saying. And I want a video recording because I want to be able to see if they are, reading from something or anything like that. And I'm rotating around the room, making sure everybody's being honest. The reason I don't do this very often is because then I've got to watch all those videos at a later time. When we do the assessments within class time, I'm grading them right then and there. And so when the bell rings, I'm done. I don't have a stack of videos to watch or tapes to listen to. I've already done that. So I don't do this very often, but every once in a while, I think once a year I do, where they can pre-record one, but they're recording it in class live, not at home where I really can't see what they're doing. So are there any other questions about speaking assessments? And while you're thinking about that, let me just remind you, we do have our free masterclass, and let me put that link up here for you. At mm.us/masterclass, it's 8 lessons to show you how to get started with comprehensible input in your class. So you can get that for free. If you found this at all helpful, please like and subscribe. The YouTube will then send this video out to other teachers so more people can get their eyes on them, and that helps us out tremendously. So please do that if you can, especially if you found this information helpful. Next week, we are going to be talking about formative and informal assessments. So we'll do that next week, same time, same channel, 5 o'clock Pacific time on Monday. So until then, thank you all for being here today. I wish you all a great week, and I will see you next Monday. Have a great one, everybody.